It's safe to say that the ocean is our lifeblood. We rely on it for water, food, fuel, as a means for transportation. It regulates our climate, produces oxygen, and removes carbon from the atmosphere. But the health of our oceans, which is heavily dependent on marine biodiversity, is under serious threat. And in fact, without significant changes, by the year 2100, more than half of the world's marine population, a species, may be on the brink of extinction. And virtually all of the challenges facing this vital biodiversity are caused by humans. Overfishing has had the single greatest impact on biodiversity over the past 50 years. Now, currently, some 34% of global fish populations are overexploited. And overfishing has reduced stocks of large, high-demand predators, such as the Mediterranean swordfish and the bluefin tuna, by about 90% compared to their pre-industrial fishing populations. The indiscriminate fishing practices, such as dredging for bottom-dwelling species such as shrimp and scallops, for example, can destroy coral reefs, kelp forests, and rocky bottom habitats. Marine debris, too, can have detrimental impact on ocean wildlife. The plastic is a major component, accounting for approximately 60 to 80% of all debris found in oceans. It can entangle and kill marine organisms. Sea turtles, birds, and marine mammals also end up ingesting plastic they mistake for food. Another driver of marine biodiversity decline is climate change. Warmer waters cause coral bleaching, change migratory patterns of many marine species, and diminished sea ice results in the loss of vital habitat for polar bears, seals, penguins, whales, and other megafauna. The biodiversity loss in our oceans is already happening. It's scientists say if we don't act quickly, it will have an impact on the ability of these waters to adapt to climate change, to withstand disturbances largely caused by humans, and to play the role of global ecological and climate regulator. And this will ultimately threaten our own survival.
So, is there still time to reverse the damage that's been done? Well, to answer that question and more, we are joined now by Stephen Palumbi, Jane and Marshall Steele Jr. Professor in Marine Sciences at the Stanford Hopkins Marine Station. Thank you for joining us, Professor, on this very important day. Back in 2006, you and your team of ecologists and economists had concluded that all kinds of wild seafood will collapse within 50 years unless we fundamentally change the way we manage the ocean. Do you still stand by that prediction that you made 15 years ago, or has things changed?
Thanks for the opportunity to talk to everybody on World Ocean Day. And that's an excellent question. And that long ago, we were looking at the amazingly fast decline of one species after another in the oceans and in fisheries markets all over the world. And since then, there have been some problems that have gotten a lot worse, like climate change. But some problems have actually gotten better. So since then, countries around the world have begun really trying to turn around the overfishing problem. And one species after another have been working through some of the ways that you can actually fish sustainably, fish in a way that supports marine ecosystems and then delivers those products hopefully forever. So to answer your question, things have gotten better since then. They're not actually all solved, but things have gotten better.
Well, let's talk about overfishing, since you've mentioned it. There's been a lot of attention on not only that issue, but also our plundering of the oceans have recently dominated the headlines. But why does overfishing and overexploitation continue even as fish become scarcer? It becomes more costly to even catch them.
Well, that's an excellent question, and you're totally right. It gets more costly to catch fish as the fish numbers decline. But families need food, they need the income, industries need to bring in products, there's people in the world to feed, so there's a steady pressure to keep fishing and to keep fish coming out of the ocean. Balancing that is a very tricky proposition. And it turns out if you protect parts of the ocean from overfishing, then those parts can grow back fishing stocks, and they can help fishing outside those parks. So the realization that protecting parts of the ocean in marine protected areas is an important solution to the overfishing problem has been a real revolution in the last 15, 20, 25 years.
Professor, can you talk about how efficient or how inefficient the current state of fisheries management is? How can we fish smarter and not harder so that industrial commercial fishing practices are more sustainable? And can you give us a concrete example? Are there any countries out there that we can look to as a model for how to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated system. You've got fish living all over the world. The fish don't know international borders. The fleets go across the whole oceans. And so managing that in a way that is you're able to respond to the actual state of the fisheries is really difficult. Plus, fish populations come and go. You would have to fish differently in every single year in order to do it perfectly. So that's what has made it so complicated. Add to that the incredible machine power of our fishing fleets. And one mistake in the wrong direction can mean a whole population can be dropped very, very quickly from high numbers into low numbers. Mm-hmm. So there have been ways that people have found to make that easier. One way is to give the power of regulating back to the fishermen, say you don't have to fish and you don't have to fish just this much. You can choose when you do it. You can choose what time of year. Essentially, you have a particular individual quota to go after and let the fishermen decide how to do that. There's also ways of internationally now knowing where fishing boats are that we never had before. And that can tell us the disposition of those fleets and a little bit where they're fishing.
And Professor, I mentioned earlier, but collapses of species are also hastened by the plastic pollution, which might be the most visible sort of environmental issue. Is marine litter recoverable, and are measures like biodegradable plastics effective enough?
It's been very difficult to recover any substantial amount of the plastic pollution from the world's oceans. The oceans are so big, the problem is so big, and then plastic doesn't stay. Big plastic bags are huge mats. It breaks down into smaller particles that, ironically, they get eaten by smaller and smaller and smaller creatures. But then those creatures are eaten by bigger and bigger and bigger species. So that plastic pollution gets into the food chain because it breaks down and then builds up again. What do you do about that? Biodegradable plastic is one way to go, but also stopping the pollution at the source has been a consensus view that that's one of the best ways to begin to solve this problem. You can pick up trash on the beach like we're seeing on the screen, and that's a fabulous thing to do. And it's an important thing once the plastic gets into the ocean, but it's actually better to stop it from getting there to begin with.
Prevention better than a cure, definitely. So because of climate change, the ocean is getting warmer, it's more acidic, there's less oxygen in it, and many species are actually migrating north to colder and cleaner waters. But some species, corals, can't do that. How dire has this been in recent years? We know that some of your research shows reasons for optimism. Tell us about that.
Well, you're totally right that corals and coral decline have been one of the biggest ecosystem changes on the planet caused by climate change. You can see it from space. It's called global climate coral bleaching. It's where the color of the coral disappears because they get rid of their internal symbionts. You see the skeletons underneath. They turn white. That bleaching then is just a harbinger of the corals dying. What we have found, and other people around the world have found, though, is that there's some corals that can survive temperatures that cause other corals, even in the same species, to bleach. And so we're looking into that trait to say, what traits do the corals have that can survive those heat attacks? And what do those traits tell us? Can we find them? Can we use those corals to grow heat-resistant reefs around the world? Can we find the genetics involved? Can we look at the symbionts involved? Just having those corals that can survive when others don't is that asset, that little shining bright light that we're going after to try to help preserve corals over the next century.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you for your time today, Professor. That was Professor Stephen Palumbi, Jane and Marshall Steele Jr. Professor in Marine Sciences, Stanford Hopkins Marine Station.